Good evening. I'm James Lamb, a writer at nerdsofcolor.com. I'm speaking tonight with William Bruce West. You've read his stuff over at williambrucewest.com. He's forgotten more about popular culture than you've ever heard of or know, and I'm very happy to speak with him tonight. Hello, Will.
Hello, thanks for having me.
All right, we're going to get started with our conversation. Must there be a Wonder Woman? So, there's been a lot of talk about Wonder Woman recently. Gal Gadot, many of you have heard, has been cast as a new Wonder Woman in the Man of Steel sequel, and we wanted to ask Will West a few questions about that. More or less, there's been a huge clamor for a female superhero movie. Wonder Woman in that debate has been ubiquitous. In fact, most of the time a person reads a blog post or an article about a female superhero movie, they're talking about Wonder Woman. I want to know why. And look, Will, I had to ask you about it. You worked in the comics industry. You know what it's like to sell comic books. What makes Wonder Woman the preeminent female superhero, and do we really need a Wonder Woman movie?
I think it's because she's the elder stateswoman of comics. You know, it generally comes down to she's been around the longest. That's ultimately a lot of what comes into her popularity. Do we need a Wonder Woman movie? Well, do we need any of them? Do we need another Batman movie? Do we need another X-Men movie? We don't need any of them, but I think it's about time she got her due. You know, sheerly for the fact that she's been around for so long. It just seems like a gross oversight. And I mean, I've been in both camps. I've been with you thinking, no, we don't need one. But then I've also had a bit of a change of heart thinking that, well, she is a symbol to a lot of people out there, and so they deserve to see their hero on the screen.
Yeah, so on that point in particular, a symbol to people out there, we're basically talking about the feminist community at this point. I mean, we're talking about women and men who are clamoring for the female as superhuman protagonist. Now, I get that Wonder Woman's been out there the longest. Let's tease that out a little bit. What can you tell us about her comic origins and how they play into this particular feminist support for her character?
Well, her creator, William Moulton Marston, was a pretty well-known feminist, even back in an age where that wasn't common for a male scientist. But he was an inventor, scientist. He decided that Superman needed not even necessarily an equal, but a replacement. And that's ultimately what Wonder Woman was meant to be. While Superman embodied the hero of that time, who was this just uber masculine figure, Marston felt that that type of hero lacked an important ingredient, which is love. That in that day and age, they wouldn't allow a male character to have something to display, to just be consumed by a notion like love, because that was seen as a weakness. So Marston felt that a female hero would be even more powerful than a male, because it would be allowed to have that love and compassion that you typically wouldn't see in a male hero. So that was generally why it was felt that Wonder Woman was kind of like the newer model of Superman.
New model. Well, we're talking about this a character who's also has a lot of history with World War II. I mean, we're talking about a character who was created at a time where the Western world was fighting against an absolute evil threat. You know, the Axis powers, as it were. Wonder Woman always seems more stuck in her absolutist perspective than other characters. Can you tease that out a little bit for me?
She definitely does, and I think it's because really you have a situation where the reason she was created and the reason she has survived are somewhat at odds with each other. Very few writers can necessarily get a handle on that unique dichotomy she has going on there. So you're right in that she's really been painted into absolutes, absolute good, absolute evil, but that tends to ebb and flow depending on who's handling the character. And I feel that that was best represented when you had a writer like George Perez or even the Greg Rucka run. Those are the writers who seem to be able to humanize her and bring her out of those extremes.
But why Wonder Woman? Because she just doesn't apply herself to the modern world very well.
But then neither does Superman. You and I have had the conversation before where when I'm anti Wonder Woman, I say that she hasn't really had a worthwhile story. It took 40 years for that to happen because no one mentions any part of her Golden Age or Silver Age run. No one mentions anything about Wonder Woman being good until George Perez comes along post-Crisis. But then I thought about it, and there are holes in that argument because the same could be said for Superman. There aren't a lot of classic Golden and Silver Age Superman tales unless they were a situation where they introduced a popular character who's still around. And a lot of that happened from the radio show with notions like Kryptonite and Perry White and all of that stuff. So when you get to Superman, the first story that anybody really talks about there is whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, and again, we're at post-Crisis. So even with Batman, sure, there's introduction of the Joker, introduction of Robin, but when you get to the critically acclaimed stuff, again, you're talking Dark Knight Returns, and we're back to the 80s again. So a lot of these characters were really just treading water for a good 40 years as superheroes went in and out of being the flavor of the day. The superheroes had a real tough time there in the mid-'60s, which is kind of what was going on with Batman. Batman had a resurgence because of the show. Now, a lot of people look back on the show and hate it as camp, but superheroes just weren't really doing all that well at that period. That was the era of the romance comic, the western comic, the sci-fi comic, but not really superheroes. So really, when you deal with the entire Trinity, the DC Trinity, so to speak, they're all really just popular because of their longevity.
Characters that we know and love in DC didn't do very much by way of complex storytelling until post-Crisis. The Crisis basically allowed comics in general to think of the medium in a different way. But when you go from those post-Crisis stories, I grew up having to read Watchmen. I had to know about Batman Year One and The Dark Knight Returns in order to have a useful conversation about comics with other people who love comics. There's never been a point in my life where someone's like gone to me and go, "Hey man, you don't know comics. You didn't read the Perez run on Wonder Woman." Like that just doesn't happen. My question is, even though there have been useful runs on Wonder Woman that have identified elements of the character that haven't really been discussed before, have any of them risen to the level of a Batman Year One? I would say the same about Superman, true, that there aren't a whole lot of Superman stories that hit that mark of real literature from a graphic novel perspective. But I don't see anything from the Wonder Woman canon. Please discuss.
I would agree with you there. I definitely would agree with you there. Even getting to Crisis and post-Crisis, there still just aren't that many seminal Wonder Woman runs. It's not a thing that's out there. And this is a controversial stance to take, but ultimately, if you're looking at body of work, Wonder Woman never really earned her spot in DC's Trinity. She is there because they're basically all in the same high school class together, and they remain friends. But some of them went off to .coms, and some of them went off to Burger King. Wonder Woman went off to Burger King, and that's ultimately, but they still answer her calls. That's really how the situation plays out there. She just doesn't have that body of work, but she's been powerful in terms of just being a symbol, in just visibility. I was saying before that when I was very anti Wonder Woman, I was saying it was because she doesn't have the comics work. But does that really matter? Ultimately, if she sells lunchboxes and panties and underoos and makeup, she's still serving her purpose for Warner Brothers. So at the end of the day, she's still powerful as a visible symbol, even if she doesn't necessarily have the source material.
And this becomes my problem with the feminist support of Wonder Woman. There are so many other female superheroes today. Storm, Black Widow, Manhunter, Cassandra Cain even. I could imagine more interesting films being done about any of those characters than I can see from essentially a World War II holdover. She just seems so dated with the absolutist world view, the forced peace warrior for peace stuff, the ambassador who thinks she's a perfect woman better than everyone else. The characterizations we get from Wonder Woman are always Princess Diana royalty, even though she spends most of her time either kicked out of Themyscira or not really being the kind of role model I could imagine the women of the Western world really wanting their daughters to support, because she's not wearing very many clothes, frankly. Superman gets a full-body suit now, even though he's often been wearing his underwear outside of his pants. Batman wears body armor. She wears a miniskirt.
Yeah, but I think it comes back to the idea, and this is going to be the theme of the night, that you never forget your first. And I think it's the longevity. She is the elder stateswoman of comics. And that I think we get into a situation, and we discussed this on the blog, with potential body shaming of, with her costume, is that a bad thing? I remember reading up on her, and the fact that, in the 60s and 70s they depowered her and she just wore like mod jumpsuits and new martial arts, and eventually they got her back into her original costume, primarily because Gloria Steinem was upset that she wasn't in the costume we had all come to love. So even if it does look like a stripper at Mardi Gras, there is a there's a population that it's a symbol, just as much as that S means hope where he comes from, and just as much as bats strike fear into the hearts of criminals. That suit is a symbol to many people out there. Especially, I don't even, disregarding the feminist community, just little girls out there. They have no one really to look up to, and Marvel doesn't really do the best job of promoting their female heroes. If they do, it's like, okay, say your little girl went to see the Avengers. Okay, she can gravitate towards Black Widow. Black Widow is not necessarily, I mean, Princess Diana may seem sort of chaste and also very polarized, but things are black and white with her. You don't really want your kid emulating Natasha Romanoff, you know? So Marvel's female characters, while they may be real, they also aren't ones you want to bring home to your daughter. She-Hulk, great character, can't carry a book. Just can't, no matter how many times they try. And she's a modern woman, she's a professional woman, but she's also kind of the female Tony Stark of the Marvel Universe in terms of who she's bedded. You don't have those stories when it comes to Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman, mainly because she doesn't have a seminal run behind her, can be anything you want her to be. And that's where her power lies.
It goes without saying that I find the sexualization of women in comics like kind of dumb. Like, I wrote a post called "Comics Are for Children" once, where I talked about how, in essence, in superhero comics especially, most everything is dumbed down to the point where it's really not written for anyone who's an adult. But the difficulty I have with that anti-intellectualism in comics really boils down to the ways in which comics have to characterize people through stereotypes in order to keep things at a pretty much lowbrow level. Never is that more true than with Wonder Woman. I can't understand how we're supposed to respect a woman who's been around since the 40s, in her modern iteration, who doesn't really wear clothes, who kind of what runs around thinking that she can solve problems with her. If she really is the love character, why don't we see more actual diplomacy from Wonder Woman? And can those kinds of ideas, less violence, more thought-provoking ways of conflict resolution, can that be injected into a Wonder Woman movie to help redefine what the genre can be?
Well, you bring up an interesting point. You go back to the costume, and it's a tough stance with the costume because while it's not a lot of clothing, to a lot of people out there, that's not a bad thing, and not even from a sexual standpoint, but in an empowerment standpoint. Wonder Woman's costume is almost like a visual. It's almost like nigger, where now it is reclaimed. There was a point in time where comics were a boys' club, and what she was wearing could be construed as, well, that's a male power fantasy. But through her strength and through her symbolism to the feminist community, that became empowering. She took it back from men. It no longer meant what it was like pushed off on her. I see your face. You're coming with some disagreement.
I don't want to cut you off. I like what I'm hearing, except no one makes that argument about Power Girl's boob window.
You know what, though? No one really makes an argument about Power Girl. The only time anybody even talks about Power Girl is her boob window. The sheer problem, the main reason Wonder Woman has the spotlight is because there's no one else ready to claim that. You mentioned there are all these other like multifaceted characters, but they don't get that push. It's like wrestling. There are a lot of people who could be the champ, but if they don't get that push, then they just end up back in some high school gymnasium.
I totally agree with you there. But I think, and this is, well, I'll just say it flat out. I think the push doesn't happen because feminists are racist. Sorry. I think the push doesn't happen because there's an assumption that when the first giant, big-name, blockbuster for the summer, humongous budget, female superhero movie finally takes off, you have to have a Jennifer Lawrence at the helm. You have to have a Gal Gadot at the helm. You have to have somebody identifiably white, or it doesn't operate for the feminists as feminists. The example to me of mainstream superhero comics getting a woman character that people can actually relate to and believe in who actually is feminist is always going to be Storm. With so many identity problems she has, and believe me, that's a whole other show to go delving through the Black Barbie from East Africa who somehow never spends time with Africans. But
well, she was married to one, they just didn't live together.
Yeah, didn't live together and didn't stay together, and thank you, Reginald Hudlin. But seriously, for the most part, Storm has been leader of the X-Men, one of the principal mutants, in mutant kind, one of the few people who can actually take on the big name other X-Men and force them to see reason. She's been so many things that Wonder Woman isn't, because as like the third wheel of the Trinity, Wonder Woman just doesn't have the same kind of gravitas when the men are talking. Whereas Storm has always been the important one in all those books. She's leading the X-Men, main book right now, unless I haven't collected recently. The point I'm making about Storm is, I would rather see a Storm movie. I can envision strong black woman taking on dangers affecting mutant kind by herself. I can see those stories working in a way that I don't see with Wonder Woman, and I feel like the only reason we ever have this ongoing conversation about a Wonder Woman movie as the first big female action superhero blockbuster making sense movie is because white feminists want to see themselves. And I am tired of having a conversation where white feminists ignore the fact that there are so many other different women out there who aren't them.
Well, see, is it a question of white feminists are racist, or just that the black feminist movement, or the multicultural feminist movement for that matter, hasn't really permeated the comic industry? I mean, it's the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and that's really, when you get down to it, comics are white. Like that's just what it is. Comics are white. Like I was a buyer for the distributor. I saw the submissions, and it's sad because it's kind of like they taught us growing up that we have to work twice as hard, and that's kind of how you had to do in comics. I mean, everybody's late in the small press, but if you're black in small press, that's really gonna hurt you. Like comics are just white. So until that changes, I think that's really a bigger problem as far as both genders. Then the feminist multicultural movement can gain a foothold too. But at the end of the day, comics are white, catering to white middle-aged men.
So knowing that comics are white, catering to white middle-aged men, doesn't that inform the visual look of the comics more than anything? I mean, wouldn't Wonder Woman have found pants 20 years ago if comics itself was more diverse?
Well, another thing about the comics industry, which is what keeps it down but also keeps it going, is it doesn't like change. Comic fans hate change. Yet they say, "Oh, we've heard and read this story before." Well, it's because Marvel and DC know that you'll keep buying it. But comics are like a soap opera. They are. You have to give the illusion of change without changing anything at all, because you have infinite time. You're gonna run forever. Like there's probably never gonna be a final episode of Days of Our Lives until they actually get some lead time and find out this is your last season. Otherwise, it's just going to disappear like every other soap opera does. And same with comics. I mean, until Disney decides, you know what, comics aren't doing anything for us anymore, I doubt they'll have like a giant wrap-up month. If they do, then you know they're just going to relaunch again in a couple months. Because that's what those things mean. But generally, in a soap opera, is give the illusion of change without changing anything. Clothes, if you're on a movie set, they have people who that's their job to keep continuity going, to remember, oh, you were wearing this shirt and it was buttoned to this point. And it's the same thing with comics. Changing her costume would have been too drastic. She was in it too long. That's part of the issue people had with the New 52, where a lot of it's just visual. It was foolish for Superman to wear his underwear outside of his pants, but he did, and that's what we were used to. And now he doesn't, and that bothers a lot of people, myself included. And that I mean, I don't lose any sleep over it, but it's just kind of like, that's what I grew up knowing. So the industry doesn't really embrace change. But it's going to have to if it's going to appeal to a new audience.
Well, speaking of that new audience, so I wrote a couple posts on Wonder Woman. I would dare to say that they've been couple of the more controversial posts on the site. And one of the things that I learned during that conversation, do we need a Wonder Woman movie? The conversation we shouldn't have about Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, was that I believed that it was supportive of feminism generally to embrace the idea of visually accepting active physical women, fitness models, CrossFit chicks, women bodybuilders. And I wanted to see if they're going to do a Wonder Woman movie, and I don't think they have to in any way, but if they're going to go ahead and push, that lever, let's see a fitness model cast. Let's see a CrossFit woman. Let's see a woman with like ripped abs and like pecs, and a woman who can like press double her body weight and do crazy squats and has all kinds of obvious musculature. Because I wanted to avoid something that I called the Joss Whedon conceit, where you have a dainty, small-statured woman, 85 pounds dripping wet, running in with her superpowers, and then getting into fights with men 2 and 3 times her size, where she knocks them through walls and throws them up ceilings and can cave their face in with punches. I get it. It's superhero fantasy, and there are men who are very much interested in having a woman beat them up. Okay. But visually, that always bothered me. I like the Nolan verse. I like the idea that a guy has to go through decades of training to be able to hold himself capable in a fight against multiple opponents when they're human. I get you have to be able to do push-ups at a moment's notice and press weight and all this stuff. And I thought it was feminist supporting to want to see a woman hit those kind of notes on screen. And yet, we're given more of Joss Whedon's Summer Glau, or now Gal Gadot. I mean, I didn't like the fact that we had to have a conversation about how this woman looked, but without question, every time we've seen her in her scant film history, she's been an incredibly skinny, small-statured woman. Of course, she can embrace the gym and gain some muscle, and no one's saying that she can't. Hugh Jackman and Tom Hardy and Christian Bale didn't look like the behemoths they became to be superheroes and villains when they first started out. So that's obvious. But I really want to talk about why it is that when we see women on screen, generally speaking, they still have to appeal to a male gaze that's about keeping them smaller, dainty, more Victorian, when in essence, none of that makes any kind of sense in the context of the films we want to push them in now, like superhero movies.
That's a good point. That's an excellent point. I always felt that the Joss Whedon thing was really to appeal to a wider audience, in the sense that you're going to have more dainty little girls than you would fitness models. But honestly, the average is an in-between. I don't even need a fitness model. That would be nice, but just someone built like an actual woman. Not a girl, just a woman. And in the Gal Gadot casting, I don't even know if I want to go down that road, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. It makes sense that they want a virtual unknown, but there are just other choices that could be made. My friend Howie Decker at underscoopfire.com wrote a post of 12 women who were better choices for Wonder Woman than Gal Gadot, and it was sort of tongue-in-cheek, but ultimately he was on the right track, that there were a lot of women out there who could have fit what they were going for, who could fill this role. But we don't really know what goes on in those meetings or what the thinking is. A lot of people assume that this is the reverse Avengers, where we're actually getting a Justice League movie, which then they can spin off into separate movies. But I don't give DC and Warner Brothers that much credit. I don't see a Gal Gadot Wonder Woman movie. If there's a Wonder Woman movie, which there one day will be, I don't think it's her. I don't see them having... The thing with Avengers that people don't understand is Marvel built an infrastructure. Like, yeah, you may not want people to say you're copying somebody, but you go with what works. And DC and Warner Brothers just don't have that going. They wanted to build shared universes. I mean, Angela Bassett as Amanda Waller was supposed to be their Nick Fury. She was hired to be in multiple movies, but then when Green Lantern went nowhere, there that goes out the window. So it's like they've been picking and choosing what they want from the Marvel model, but you can't do that. You're either all in or you do your own thing. And I don't really think they know what they want to do. This seems just as thrown together. Every day there's another announcement of someone else being shoved into this movie. And it's almost like the Justice League movie that almost got off the ground before the writer's strike, which would have been Lord only knows what kind of a clusterfuck, but that thing was cast and ready to roll. So I don't. We may get some semblance of a Justice League here, but I don't think Gal Gadot is going to be Wonder Woman. She could be one in a line of Wonder Women, just like Halle Berry is not Catwoman. She is a Catwoman. I think that's what Gal Gadot will be when we look back on things.
My question for you, Will, is what would make me see a Wonder Woman movie? I didn't watch The Hunger Games. I can give a fuck about a Katniss. That just sounds like cat food to me. Seriously, I have no interest whatsoever in watching yet another tween something happen. And what's supposed to pull me as a 30-something black man into seeing a movie about Wonder Woman?
Well, I think that's a good question, and I think that's a question that even Warner Brothers can't answer, which is why they found the next best thing. They found a movie that you would go see, and they put a Wonder Woman in it. And that's really the best we can ask for right now. Because they've tried. They just can't get a handle on her. If you ever got a chance to see the NBC pilot from 2011, that thing is terrible. They have so loose of a grasp on her that she has three separate identities. Three separate identities. Not two, but three. Because that's what was needed to get a 44-minute pilot done. Three identities.
I'm sorry. You're going to have to unpack that just a tad. Three identities?
She's Wonder Woman. Then she's Princess Diana of Themyscira. And then she's also Diana Prince, who runs like a multinational corporation that seems to license Wonder Woman memorabilia. So she gets high on her own supply, because there's a whole bunch of scenes about how she has to approve the Wonder Woman action figures for the next quarter, like that sort of situation. She has three identities, but then she still goes home and eats Haagen-Dazs and checks Facebook and Match.com.
Okay, stop. I'm sorry. Wait a minute. In this pilot, Wonder Woman is leaning all the way in Sheryl Sandberg style, but still has time to get her Bridget Jones on.
Yes, because it's lonely at the top.
What in the country fuck is this?
That's why we don't have it on TV.
See, this is my point. She's schizophrenic as a character. These people are paid all manner of money. I'm not saying that Hollywood screenwriters are brilliant or dunces. I'm just saying that these people are paid a lot of money to get characters that have lasted 70, 80 years right for 45 minutes. And the best they can do to fit in all the crazy that has accumulated in this character over the years is multiple personality disorder?
It just comes down to nobody can get a grasp on her as a character.
Doesn't that mean she's a bad character?
It means she is a delicate character. It doesn't mean you just have to throw her out, but you have to be a little more careful in who you choose to babysit her. For years, people clamored, please get Gail Simone on Wonder Woman. She writes women so well. Get Gail Simone on Wonder Woman. They gave Wonder Woman to Gail, and her run is pretty much almost as forgettable as many others. That was a Gail fail, just like her run on the all-new Atom. So, you just never know. You never know. I'm sure when Rucka was first brought up, people probably felt, this guy? But he was a surprise, So you just have to be careful who you trust her with.
All right. Well, hey, we've unpacked the invisible plane. Remember that? I want to thank my man Will West here from WilliamBruceWest.com. He's forgotten more about pop culture than I've ever known, certainly. Thank you for giving us a chance to learn a lot more about Wonder Woman. Yeah, I can't imagine who's going to go out and see Wonder Woman in a solo venture. But hey, if Rucka can make the character sing, anything's possible, right?
Anything's possible.
All right. You can check us out again at the Nerds of Color. This segment is the inaugural segment of Knocking Heads. So thank you very much for enjoying with us, and see you in the funny pages.